So let's move into the action outcome statement that we've chosen for today. And it's a very short one. However, there's a lot involved with these two words. And the action outcome is manage documentation. Because there's 68 action outcome statements that make up the profile to get your certificate of competence mentor. And those 68 require some documentation associated with them. And Doug and I want to just go through the key elements of that documentation. We're not going to dive into it like how you fill out a form or anything like that, but it's just highlight what are the kind of things that need to be put in place for this to work. So I'm going to start it off. And the key here is the documentation is a traceable record of what was. So think about it from that perspective. The documentation traces what has happened, but it's also a place of tracing the reflective learning that can then be taken into the future. So it has a bit of a history story to it, the documentation, a presence story to it, and a future story to it. So getting great at documentation is actually quite helpful to the mentor. And there are elements of documentation that the mentee will keep, and especially around, the ideas that they've learned. And we call that maybe a journal. But for the mentor, there's other aspects, and that's what we're going to go over today. So the very first thing that mentors need to pay attention to in working with the IMC is that there's a profile, the 68 action outcomes, from which a self-assessment is made. And the question is, can I, whatever the action outcome statement. So in this case, it's, can I manage documentation? And it's either a yes or no. And if it's a no, there has to be some reason for that in your self-assessment you've identified. But it's keeping that record, because if you're jumping into the certificate of competence pathway, you need a baseline to do a little bit of a check and balance as you move along. And when you have that, then you can go, oh, okay, so this is what happened for me here, and this is what happened for me here, and therefore I can keep track of what's taking place.
I just want to add a little piece to the self-assessment piece that people do, that I really truly do encourage people to go down that path and go and complete the self-assessment piece, because it gives you a baseline to work from, number one, and number two, it's also a great place to determine, do I have all the knowledge that I would like to have to be able to go forward to be an effective mentor. So to me, I went through and I've done it, and I'm glad that I did, because it was that sort of that look in the mirror that I really needed to have to be able to then go on from there.
And that links into the next piece, which is the portfolio. Do you want to pick up on that, Doug, and just share a little bit about what the portfolio is about?
I certainly can. So with the portfolio, there are a number of things that you're going to do. Obviously, the self-assessment document that's going to show that, questions that you'll have made no's need to be yeses, so you can move on from there. But there's also some case studies that are required to be completed. And those are definitely a test of your ability to apply the concepts, certainly at the competence level. It's a test for your ability to apply mentoring concepts and practices, and to be, basically verified that you are actually competent. And in addition to that, there's some reflective pieces, and I'm a huge, huge fan of reflection. So for me, that was also something that was really important as part of that process. And the idea behind that is you take all those documents, become part of your portfolio, and that's what goes forward to the verifier, or if you're doing the certificate of achievement, to the auditor.
Yeah, so the key part of the self-assessment going into the portfolio is also a record of how you know what you know. Because what you have to do is you have to list out is, if I've given it a yes, how do I know that it was a yes? Did I attend a course, see a video? Did I write an article? Is it coming from lived experience? Can I check it out in my mentor log? It's a record. So your first cut, and then you have how you fill it in, because you want to get it to all being yeses. So there's documentation about the self-assessment into the portfolio is just that history, mystery, presence kind of conversation that we're speaking about. The other thing that is important is to really come to understand what your learning is. And that portfolio gives you that reflective learning about what has happened for you. And when you start to take that learning and start to apply it into a place of knowing, then that is a great way to keep taking steps forward and becoming a competent mentor. But there's another element that goes into the competence world. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about audit and verification and certification here. But this is something that I know is near and dear to Doug's heart, is the mentor log. And it's great to have it no matter where you are in your mentoring arrangement, mentoring journey, and serving as a mentor. But it really plays itself out when you are going after your certificate of competence. But before I talk more about that, let's just unpack. What's a mentor log, Doug?
Well, the best way, without obviously drilling down into it, but it's a place for the mentor to log the degree of effort that they've expended working with a particular mentee. So by degree of effort, I mean hour, is it an hour of time, is it half an hour of time, so on and so forth. And there's a number of different areas that you would fill in. The most important part of the mentoring log that I find is, number one, it's a place that I capture all the mentoring that I'm doing. So if I need to, somebody says, well, say for sake of recertification as a competent mentor, I'm going to be able to present my log to be able to say, I have done 500 hours in the last 2 years. What I've found most recently, because I'm working with probably about 35 different mentees in various places all over the world, is that I like to prepare just a bit before I go into a mentoring session. I can go to my log and see what we talked about last time. I can see if there were some action items that the mentee was supposed to do some work on. Maybe they were going to have a tough conversation with an employee or something like that. I can refresh my memory on what that conversation was to some extent, and then be in a position to be able to ask the question. So tell me, how, you were going to have a conversation with Sally on last Wednesday. How did that conversation go? Is there something we could have done differently, and so on from there? So I find that because of the volume of people that I'm working with, having that log to be able to go and reflect back on before I go into the next session is extremely important for me.
Oh, for sure. And it's the notion of portfolio is portable. You can take it from place to place to place. And it's a great documentation for even like hiring processes. Because if you can show that you've done some mentoring somewhere, that might lead to a promotion within your organization or not. It might help you when you go to become a volunteer mentor in a youth program. There's lots of ways in which the portfolio in its presentation, beyond what IMC is doing, is of great value to you as well. And that mentor log, being able to add it into that is just, it sort of gets to be the icing on the cake, so to speak, right? Now, there has been a mention here about certification and recertification and audit and verifying. So I just want to clean up a little bit here. The main pathway that is influenced by the documentation, and the main pathway through IMC is to get a certificate of competence mentor. And to do that, you are submitting your portfolio with the self-assessment. You're submitting aspects of your mentor log, not all of it, because there's confidentiality aspects to it. The case examples that Doug mentioned as well, and other application material that needs to come in. But the notion of the competence one is that you have to present enough material to help the verifier, a sort of independent third-party person who is going to confirm that you know what you know and you can do what you can do. So that there's this marriage. I know what I know, I can do what I can do, and I can bring it together and be able to get to a point is the verifier says, yes, you can do all the action outcomes. Here's the proof, and I know that to be correct. But the verifier also has the ability then, based on your submission of documents, there's still a couple of holes here, and this is my suggestion before you come back to complete the verification. So again, it helps so much with the verification part of things. The flip side is that if you don't want to go all the way to be verified competent, some people ask us, can we just get an achievement certificate that says we know what we know? And we go, for sure. And what we do is we do an audit of the portfolio with the case review so that we can go, yeah, it seems like you've got a sense of what's going on, but we don't know it completely, nor do we know if you can do anything. That's why it's certificate of achievement mentoring. In other words, you have an understanding of the mentoring world. Now, that's all great. So we have the sense of the self-assessment, we have the portfolio, we have the mentor log, we have the case reviews, and we have the audit and verification reports. Therefore, one of the last pieces of documentation is to apply for the certificate. Yes, you got your certificate of competence, mentor, or your certificate of achievement, mentoring. And we're always pleased to send those out. Both Doug and I sign those, and you have those for placing up on your wall. Now, that takes us through, but Doug also mentioned the notion of recertification. So every couple of years for your certificate of competence, you got to come back and recertify. Therefore, the documentation you created plus the new entries presents the documentation for the new verification. Any thoughts, Doug?
No, I just, for me, the recertification part of that the whole verification process is really important, because I've been involved in mentor certification, certainly from trying to get it going, because that was one thing. It's a long story, and to make it short, is that the recertification to me is important, because you need to be able to constantly be learning and growing as a mentor, and the recertification helps to be able to verify that that actually has taken place. That I don't go and get my certificate out of a popcorn box, for, as an example, and I've got it and I put it on the wall and that's it. I'm done. I'm good to go now forever and ever. And one of my biggest, I guess, bones of contention that I've had with accreditation and certification was that there was never that recertification process. And that's why IMC has done what we've done, is to make sure that that is in fact in place.
Well, for sure. And that's why managed documentation is one of the 68 action outcomes. Get into it, do it, and keep doing it. And it helps out in the long run from your continuous improvement, continuous education perspective.